Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Learning Strategies that Help You Measure, Optimize, and Master the Customer Experience. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's get started with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are David Wentworth, who is the Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and Samantha Murray, who is the Solutions Marketing Manager at Docebo. I would like to extend a thank you to Docebo for sponsoring today's webinar. Docebo is reimagining learning and is trusted by more than 2,000 companies worldwide. This top cloud-based LMS with AI superpowers is designed to make customers, partners, and employees love their learning experience. Docebo has achieved Brandon Hall Group's Smart Choice Preferred Provider status. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. So please be sure to visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about that. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics that you'd like to take a survey for, it's always greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, and you can always visit brandonhall.com and click on Open Surveys for the latest list. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. Now, next, for a few logistics. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the question panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded. We will share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. If you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. The chat is also open for today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion and share your thoughts with us as we go, or simply pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining in from today. And before I hand things over to Dave, a little bit about Samantha before we get started. As I mentioned, as the Solutions Marketing Manager at Docebo, Samantha is responsible for positioning, messaging, and go-to-market strategies for Docebo's external education solutions. Prior to joining Docebo, Samantha led global customer education at Shopify, and she has over 15 years experience spanning across marketing, customer experience, education, and SaaS product management. She's passionate about helping organizations create seamless learning experiences across audience segments and channels in an effort to maximize business impact and ROI. You can find her on LinkedIn, where she shares her thoughts on the future of the customer education industry. And now, without any further delay, I'll pass things over to Dave so we can dive right in.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Just making sure my mute was off, wasn't showing up. So thanks so much. And it's so great to actually to hear that background and to share that with everyone, Sam, because I think what's great is I think most folks that join these webinars have a pretty good understanding of who I am and where I'm coming from and why I'm here and talking. But I'm excited to have you here with your experience and expertise in this specific area, talking about that customer experience. You folks are in for a treat and you've got access to a great resource here. So I'm really glad to be here with you, and you've got some real practical experience with this. So hopefully people take advantage and ask us all kind of questions. So please, you see that question box there, familiarize yourself. Please ask us questions, ask each other's questions in the chat if you feel. Don't mind at all if you're having side conversations while we go. That's what this is for. So definitely want to see you guys engage in that. So thanks. And to get right in here, the reason why that we're doing this and we have Sam with us to talk about this customer experience is because, we look at things obviously from a human capital management perspective here at Brandon Hall Group. That's what we do. And in one of our most recent studies, we asked organizations in a general sense, what are your top business priorities as you look, toward the future here in the next couple of years? I think it's no surprise to folks if you've done any sort of reading lately or just looked inside your own organization. Retaining top talent is a big issue. It's the number one issue, scoring a 4.42 on a scale of 1 to 5 of importance, 5 being the most critical. But we wanted to share this because of the number 2 item that's on that list is trying to improve the customer experience. And it's very up there and it's very strong. You see that average of 4.23. So that means most organizations are pinning that as a 4 or a 5 as far as how important that is as a business priority. So it's such an important thing that every piece of the organization needs to start thinking about, well, what's our role in that, right? Because I think for a lot of people in a business that don't necessarily talk to a customer every day, right? They're not on that front line. They're not so sure that they have a role in the customer experience, right? They're, doing what they do. But hopefully what we're trying to do here is really crack open this idea of what L&D can do from a customer experience perspective. And I'm sure most folks on the call have at least a vague awareness of what that role is, but we want to sort of dig into that and show some of the ways in which we can really capitalize on that. And so with all of that, I want you to go ahead and say hi, Sam, and just talk a little bit about, this idea of how critical this customer experience really is.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Dave. And I'm really glad to be here to share some insights with the audience. So on this note of improving the customer experience, I think the thing that really stands out for me here is that, as you mentioned, customer experience can mean so many things, right? We're not just talking about the content experience or the learning and development or training and enablement experience. We're talking about how the customer interacts with the product, how the customer interacts with various services throughout their journey, from implementation to support and customer success. It's that content experience from first touch all the way through to advocacy. It's the onboarding training. It's, the way the customer interacts with all of these digital properties that you have out there that are part of your brand and part of your customer experience. And so when we talk about customer experience, it's interesting because it means so many things, and it's such a cross-functional body of work that it's important to talk about how the customer education experience plays into kind of this larger holistic thing, which is the entire customer experience. And I'm really excited to dive into this more as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and as we think about these, I looked into a lot of the organizations that we've spoken with over the years about how they do this and what they do, what they're focused on, and what the role for L&D really is. And some key elements come to the surface in all of these conversations about what can L&D do when it comes to the customer experience. So obviously we're talking about customer training, right? Delivering some sort of learning experience to your customers, whether that the training itself is the product, that happens in a lot of environments, right? So you're actually selling training as a training organization, or we also see in a lot of situations, you are delivering training on your organization, your products, your services, and how to, optimize their use. And so what we found as we talk to these companies that do this kind of training, that deliver training to their customers, what they're finding is it's the very key element in that customer relationship, right? I mean, that obviously the sales pipeline, whatever that looks like, whether it's retail or B2B, whatever it happens to be, there's a lot of customer activity in that environment, right? But then you get to the point where there's the sale and everything is signed off, and now that person goes from a prospect to a customer. There are situations where that all of a sudden the relationship sort of ends, right? You've got the thing now and you're on your own. This training provides an opportunity for organizations to keep that relationship very strong, very continuous, constantly coming back to saying, by the way, did you know this? And what you're doing is you're trying to maximize the customer's use of the product, right? So that they're getting the most out of it. So it builds that relationship in that way, which has a lot of different facets to it that we'll get into. The idea of, just customer loyalty, right? You're building that loyalty. If they feel as though they're getting all of this really good information, maybe they will either, just continue to be a customer or even grow as a customer and look to you for other solutions, other products. But another key element too is, and this is something that's been, a reality for a few years now, is this informed consumer, right? Everybody has access to information at all times. And if a customer has questions about your product or your services, they are going to get those questions answered one way or another. So the goal is to be the source of that information, of that knowledge, so you could head off any inquiries they may have before they might even have them. And so you're trying to provide them as much information as possible so that they're not feeling as though they have to go out on their own and look for workarounds, or perhaps even incorrect or out of date information. So staying ahead of that. And then of course, the unsung hero is the customer support, right? And when people talk about their great customer relationships and experiences, very often say, we have great customer support. We have really good support, and which is very important to have, right? You want to be able to have quick, responsive, courteous support help. But what's better than that is if the customer never calls the support desk in the first place. That makes the customer much happier, because let's face it, nobody really wants to do that. Nobody wants to open a ticket. But it's also good for the organization because you're not having to pour all these resources into support, right? You're heading all of those problems off ahead of time. So, these are the big pictures. Obviously, we're going to talk about a lot of other things, but these are the big ones that always seem to come to the surface when we talk to companies about how this works. And Sam, I mean, obviously in your experience, you've seen a lot of these things in action.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what comes to mind for me is the term that Adam Avramescu coined around how customer education and training is the scale engine for customer success. It couldn't be more true, right? Like by enabling your customers, by putting training in front of them earlier on in that process, you are essentially supporting your customer success reps in becoming strategic advisors. You're freeing up your support folks and your CSM's time to having a much bigger impact on strategy, on that strategic guidance piece, right? By creating these like self-reliant customers. So it really truly is a win-win across the organization by putting that training in front of customers earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you wanted to share any specific examples at this point, or if you want to just wait a little bit later, we'll talk about some of those.
Yeah, I'll probably wait a little bit later.
Okay, cool. And so then what I want to do is just sort of back up these talking points that we just went through with some specific data that we found in our research. We asked specifically, what are the things that you are getting as an organization from your customer external training? And so you can see some of the things we talked about, plus some others. The idea that it makes customer relations better. It increases the awareness that everyone has about the products and services that we have. So even if someone's a customer, they may not know some of the other things that you do, but it's through that training process, they can become aware. But it's not just customers either, right? That's also sort of that larger sphere of sort of what marketing encompasses. And that can be part of it. So training for the public at large about who you are and what you do. And so increasing that awareness obviously is very critical to the whole sales pipeline in the first place. Maximizing retention, right? So if the people are happy and satisfied and they feel like they're getting the most from the product, they're more likely to stick around and come back. Even compliance, rears its ugly head everywhere you go, even in customer training, and the idea that, there are certain things, certain industries, certain products, there has to be a certain amount of training. So making sure that we're in compliance, it's important we do that. So you can see all these, and then you have obviously increasing sales, right? Trying to upsell customers, generating revenue, which obviously goes with increasing sales, but, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, the idea that by selling the training, whether again, the training is the actual product or if it's ancillary to what else you're doing, L&D can actually generate its own revenue, which is probably unheard of for some L&D teams who are constantly told what a cost center they are. The idea that you could actually generate revenue for the organization. And then we had mentioned the reducing client support. Only 30%, pick that out of this list. It may seem low, but if you think about what goes into customer support, there's always going to be a need. You're never going to eliminate it. And if you could reduce your clients, the number of tickets your organization generates by even a couple of percent, the impact will be dramatic. So anything we can do to do that, these are all the things that customers say, or that companies say that they're able to accomplish through their customer training.
What I love about this list is the variety and breadth of what's possible with customer education, right? I think in this industry, we tend to pigeonhole ourselves into thinking that customer education really is more supportive of the post-sale experience, right? It's common knowledge. We know that customer training supports the post-sale experience, helps with onboarding, helps with time to value and product usage, and all those really great things. But what we forget is that actually customer education has a massive potential impact on everything that happens before the sale. And this speaks to what I was talking about earlier around that cross-functional alignment piece, right? Like you're touching a little bit of marketing, you're touching a little bit of advocacy, community, all of these like various elements or touch points that your customer is having with the brand. All of those things at the end of the day are learning, right? Like content is learning and teaching your customers something. And I think it's really important that as leaders in the customer education space, we think about what that cohesive experience actually looks like in order to drive all of these wonderful benefits across the organization.
Mhm.
One customer that's doing this particularly well at Docebo is Reich. Like they've really gone down the path of leaning into that pre-sale experience in terms of their education programs. And with the launch of Reich Discover, which was really like a learning hub for their customers, training plans, personalized learning experiences, right? All of those things, they've seen really great results in terms of that pre-sale experience. They found that prospects who took courses were 3 times more likely to convert than paying customers, right? Like that's a massive impact that you can be having by leveraging learning and education and training earlier on in that sales cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great stat and a great result. So before we go too much further, I wanted to check in with everybody, and we just want to get a sense when, we're assuming we've got somewhat of a self-selected group here on the call today, that you've got some interest if you're not already actively involved in customer training. So interested to find out, what would you say is your biggest challenge? Now, obviously, you could probably pick many, if not all of these, but we're just trying to get a drill down to what would, if you had to pick one that was the biggest challenge, just let us know what that would be. And we'd be interested to see, what we've got here on the call. But, it could be anything, like you can see the choices, right? So maybe one of the challenges is, how do we create the right content for the external audiences? It's a different animal than for internal learners. I think it's one of the things we can talk about. Is what I find from companies we talk to is, to be fair, as much effort as we put into making our learning for internal employees engaging and captivating and impactful, at the end of the day, it's kind of a captive audience, right? I mean, they're there, and a lot of the training we deliver, they kind of have to take that kind of thing. When you're talking about external audiences, especially customers, now you've got somebody that it's much a more discerning group, and you've got to work even harder for that attention, for that engagement, especially if there's revenue involved. What are we getting for our money? That kind of thing. So what goes into creating that experience, what goes into those content. We're going to talk about that a little bit, about how to build that, but that's a critical element. So let's close the poll and take a look at the results here. I'm waiting for it to pop up somewhere. Here we go. All right. So yeah, not surprising to me, the number one thing, and I couldn't even steer everybody into the answer on content by talking about it, is that it's the measurement. And listen, any webinar that I do about any learning topic, measurement is a challenge, and this is no different. It's really hard to measure the ROI of the program that we're putting out, and I think the biggest reason behind that, and actually, you know what, I'm gonna close this poll, and we're gonna look at some results similar to this from our research around what companies say is the challenge. Oh, look at that, the number one challenge: difficulty measuring the effectiveness. So you think about, again, the comparison to internal learning, right? And companies are already challenged trying to measure the impact that their programs are having on employees and their performance and their outcomes. Now you start talking about an audience that doesn't work for you, that you don't have interaction with on a day-to-day basis, that's vastly varied, much more dispersed and different than your internal employees. How do we keep track of what's happening as a result of the training? And it's a really big challenge, and it's something that has to be thought of from the get-go, of before we even build this thing, before we even put it together. How are we going to know that it works? What have we decided is important here? And so we'll talk, obviously, when we get into a little bit of the strategies of what to do, but clearly that's a big challenge. No surprise there. The content piece coming in there, the second, and of course, technology as well. you can have the best strategy and have your thoughts all planned out and get this great content together. But if your technology doesn't have the wherewithal to manage this kind of a complex environment with these different types of audiences that all have different needs and different levels, it takes a bit more sophisticated technology solution, definitely more complex than, hey, we've got SharePoint and some other things and we'll build it ourselves. Because I talked to enough organizations that have struggled mightily with that. And unfortunately, that's typically the first choice for most companies when they need to do something. It sounds not surprising. They'll say, well, what do we already have? Can we make that work? And they'll try to make that work for 6 months, a year, and realize that it's worse than nothing. And so it's really important to start to really think about, okay, what do I need to solve? I need technology that does these specific things, and we'll go through what some of those requirements are. But when you see some of these challenges, I'm sure, Sam, they must ring true to you in the conversations that you have. So what are some of the things about like overcoming some of these challenges?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of the ways that I've adopted in my past role at Shopify was like gaining R&D buy-in and support really early on in thinking through what that end experience might look like, which is helpful not only in terms of creating that seamless experience across whatever properties you have, right? You have an academy, you have a knowledge base, you have a digital community, whatever you might have out there. It's important to think about kind of the experience between those things. So R&D support and buy-in on your plans really early on is absolutely critical. And then ties into that measurement piece, right? Because like data is complex, it's difficult. I often see organizations have their data kind of scattered across a bunch of different tools, right? It's really critical that at this stage, when you start to consider how can I tie all of this together and how can I start to really create a seamless experience, you need data to be funneling to a single source of truth. You need to have, data science support. You need to build out those BI tool integrations that are really going to allow you to see the impact that your content is having and that your experience is having on driving those critical business outcomes that you've outlined. My personal thing is like, adopt a scientific approach, like document your assumptions, right? Create those hypotheses around what you think you'll be able to achieve by doing XYZ thing, and then make sure that you have the processes in place to be able to measure and optimize and continue iterating on your programs as you grow out this kind of seamless experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. It's interesting too. So we had that conversation just now about, trying to measure the effectiveness and understand the impact. So then when we ask though, in a general sense, how effective overall do you think your programs are? The results aren't too bad. I mean, companies have a feeling that they generally, their external customer training efforts are relatively effective. So the problem is we can't ask that question and say, does your customer training do this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing? Because effectiveness might mean different things to different organizations, right? The different things that they're focused on trying to do. But, you start to scratch a little on the surface and you saw how measuring the effectiveness was a big challenge. And then if we look at this data, we see that the ways in which companies are measuring their effectiveness are pretty two-dimensional, let's put it that way. You'll see a lot of these things, many of these could probably be interchangeable in your organization. It's mostly a terminology issue, but like a learner feedback survey, a general survey about the training or other aspects of the organization, some sort of an assessment to gauge whether or not people learned anything from the material. Just the fact that people completed it, is that, and so the things that are being used to measure the effectiveness, again, like I said, pretty two-dimensional. So the fact that, hey, we made it, we got it out there, they took it, thumbs up, good job, everybody. It's really hard to go further than that. And we all know anybody that's had to do, tried to work through the Kirkpatrick model internally, right? Making that leap from level 2 to level 3, it can seem like the Grand Canyon. So it's even harder in this situation. And you see it's only 6% say that we have a set of predetermined KPIs that we use because we haven't figured out what that is yet. So that's, and Sam was talking about that having that mindset from the get-go is really what we're talking about. Predetermined KPIs, not, hey, it's done, let's look around and see what we can measure. You have to have that in mind from the get-go. And again, you've even got 14% just say, we just don't measure it. We do it, we put it out there, and hope for the best. So yeah, I think you're 100% right. And you have a thought around, you mentioned data, and really that's what it's all about. It's just these two-dimensional things are data, but it's about finding more better data to use with that.
Yeah. And it's not to say that the rest of those things aren't incredibly valuable, because they are, right? They teach us how our learners are engaging with our content. They give us insight into, whether or not that content is resonating, and whether or not there's kind of like knowledge being acquired through the content being offered. These are all really critical things to measure and consider in terms of content strategy. But until you reach a point where you are able to say with certainty that your content is actually having an impact on the business, you will continue running into issues with, gaining leadership buy-in and growing the team in order to have further impact. And so that piece, and that's why I was saying that support from R&D and the data team is so critical in order to advance our programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so part of that is, what role does technology play? And as we jump into the technology role, I want to just acknowledge a few things that people are saying. And, what we were just talking about, and Cleon says, well, you don't know if you got there if you don't know where you're going, right? And that's 100% true. And, like you were saying, Sam, that kind of data that is being collected is important, but I have yet to have somebody argue back to me what a completion rate really tells them about something all by itself. Now, if you can say 85% of people completed it, and you can show me a difference between the 15 and the 85, now we've got something. So it is important data, but by itself, it doesn't tell you a whole lot. But yeah, that's a great point there. And then just a couple questions too. Earlier, we were talking about the benefits of the customer training. I had the data, and somebody was asking about the percentages. So let me clear that up for anybody else who might have a question as well. That slide was showing the percentage of companies that said this was a benefit that we are realizing from our customer training. And the other question is, yes, of course, there is a recording that will be available to everybody. You'll have access to these slides, you'll have access to the recording, and that'll go out here in the next day or so. So I appreciate the questions and the chat. So as we get into what the role of technology is in all of this, let's go ahead and set this up then with another poll question. And this is a select all, so you can pick as many or as few as you choose. But what do you currently have in your tech stack for training customers? Be interested to see what's being used and how many different things. As people are voting on that, Sam, I'm just going to a couple more things coming in the chat that I think are interesting. Like Rickard says, we also want to compare KPIs of people who have completed courses to people who haven't, that can show ROI, right? So that was what we're saying, is that combination of data being able to show correlations that's something that the more L&D teams can either have that skill set, access that skill set, the ability to interpret data and make correlations, you're going to be able to tell stories instead of just present data, right? You'll be able to say, oh, here's the series of things that happened rather than here's yesterday's news, right? So yeah, that's a great point, and definitely things that people should keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look and see what people selected here in the poll. Give that a second. That should pop up for me momentarily. And it has. And yeah, no surprise here. LMS is the number one thing, and it makes sense. I mean, let's talk, it's purpose built, right? And essentially, should be able to take care of it. And then you see we've got some sort of customer support portal as part of that ecosystem, an online customer community. Very key point of this, I think, of this customer education, customer training environment is the ability for customers to connect with one another, because they're the ones that have the similar experience, and they'll be able to share, hey, I had this and I did this, or I use the product in this way, and they get to learn from one another. That's often who people want to hear from. Content creation, a CRM, not surprising. We're talking about customers. And if you do have some others, you can throw that in the chat too, what you might be using. But what do you see when you look at this, Sam? Is this sort of kind of the spread you expected? Did you just expect to see more of some others?
Yeah, no, this is definitely the spread that I expected. I think, especially for customer education teams, the focus is, of course, delivering, training and learning content, you do that through a learning management system. I'm glad to see the high levels and the percentages here in terms of like the support portal, the, customer community, the content creation. All of these things are such critical tools in terms of like thinking through an ecosystem, a technology ecosystem to support your learning programs. I think what this highlights for me is a little bit of kind of a business maturity model too, right? Like as your programs mature, as your business matures, it becomes more and more important for you to start tying all of these things together, these different experiences, which when you're first starting out, they're siloed. You're like, I just need to get a training program out to these customers. I just need to be able to do this one thing, right? And that's great. But as the business expands, it's really important that we kind of zoom out and start to look at the full picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we wanted to know, okay, so here's the different things that are in technology stack, and I've got some more data around that. But first, the idea of how much of an impact does technology play in this whole thing? And a relatively strong role, right? The impact that technology has on the overall effectiveness of customer training. And like I said before, you can have the great content, you could have this great strategy, you could have all the right customer reps and support people in place, but if your technology isn't executing on that or not allowing you to execute on that, then that's where you run into trouble. So for most organizations, the right technology is going to be a big piece of the solution. And when we get into what do companies need from a technology standpoint, this, from our study on extended enterprise training, said for customer training, what do you need from your technology? What are the elements that you need? So this is no surprise, going back to everything we've just been saying for the last 30 minutes or so. Reporting analytics is number one. So not only do we need the internal skill set, not only do we need the processes in place to figure out what our KPIs are and how to measure them, we need the tools that are actually going to let us do this. Do we have the right tool that matches the data analysis skill set that we have, right? We don't have a tool that's beyond the use of anybody that we have on the team, right? Because that's not helping. It may be the most powerful analytics tool out there, but if you don't have anybody that can use it, it's not going to do you much good. So do we have a good alignment between what skill set we have and the tools that we're using for analytics? Those are, and that could be anything. It could be built into the LMS. Is the LMS giving us enough information to make the insights and decisions we need? Or do we have a separate BI tool that we're pulling data from all these different places, whatever it is? Reporting analytics, critical element here. And then, mobile capabilities, which is something that doesn't pop up as much anymore from a learning perspective, at least internally. But now when you start to talk about external audiences who, again, you have very little insight into where and when and how they're interacting with your material. So let's make sure that our content is mobile friendly, that our platform allows us to deliver there and give people the access, because like I said, we don't know where these people are. We want to make sure that they can access what they need when they need it as much as possible. Some sort of testing and assessment to make sure things are working. Data security protocols are important. Again, talking about external audiences. This is something that doesn't get thought of a lot when you talk about internal learning technologies, but as soon as you exit the organization and start looking outside, we have to start worrying about IP. We have to start worrying about data security, things like that. This one I think is interesting, the 43%, because it really does depend on your situation, but the ability to have multiple domains and portals for all your different audiences, right? So just because you can deliver learning externally, your audience groups may all have different needs. And so they need to have a different experience, whether what branded even, maybe it has a different look and feel, or they have to have different permissions, whatever it is. The ability to do that with one central tool to give these audiences their own unique experiences is important too. But obviously, Sam, you're neck deep in the technology side of this day in, day out. What are some of the things that you work with clients on and talk to them about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by anything on this list, other than I'd say like e-commerce functionality being quite low. And perhaps to me, this kind of highlights that maybe there's a misunderstanding in terms of like strategy around what's possible with e-commerce when it comes to monetizing programs. I think a lot of, and maybe going back a little bit to that business maturity piece, right? Like when you're first starting out, you just want to get an onboarding program out the door to be able to support your customers in, adopting the product, using the product and getting them to value. But there's so much opportunity when it comes to monetization and additional revenue streams with, skill-based and role-based training programs as your business, grows and your programs evolve and mature. So I'm actually surprised to see that so low in the list. But reporting and analytics, like no surprise there, that's just really hard to do for most organizations. And it really comes down to the technology, as you were saying, right? Like Docebo has a really powerful analytics tool that allows for some of that integration in terms of like business intelligence and performance data, kind of layering on how your learner engagement is happening in the LMS on top of the experience that your customer is having with all of these various other digital properties. So it comes down to tech stack, right? Like adopting the right technology at the right time to be able to achieve the business outcomes that you're aiming to achieve. And it's really critical that we look beyond just getting the content out there. It's not a publish it and they will come situation. You really need to think through what it is that you're trying to drive as a business outcome and make sure that you're optimizing for that always.
Yeah, this again, you're dealing with a non-captive audience for sure. And part of that then is, and I mentioned we saw the mobile capabilities from a technology standpoint. Another element of the technology is what are the modalities that we're able to support and put out there. And, from an internal learning standpoint, we keep talking about how, we need to have more opportunities for learners to access learning when and where and how makes the most sense for them, which means having more modalities available. Well, again, this isn't a situation where you take that and then extrapolate that out across these external audiences who obviously have even more diverse needs. So being able to put out more different types of modalities is very important to do this. And what always fascinates me too is, if you go back to 2019 and earlier, obviously before the pandemic, in-person instructor-led classroom training was the number one way that companies delivered any kind of training, internal, external. And to show the power of how vested companies are in that platform, in that medium, you go through the pandemic, shuts everything down, things so slowly come back. We're in a hybrid world. Still a lot of in-person ILT is where people are focusing. A few years ago, it would have been number one by a long shot, but here it is up in the top three, very close. But we do see there's a lot of different ways in which companies want to connect with their customers when it comes to training. And it makes sense given the current dynamic, right? So you've got the webinar platform like this, or just pushing out video, or maybe we've got an actual full-on virtual classroom, which would be like this, but with all the different tools and functionality that come with the classroom. Putting out e-learning course modules, obviously, yes. Even printed materials still relatively common, at least especially from a customer standpoint, easy to deliver with a product if you're selling a physical product. So, we still see a lot of that going on. But even, virtual reality games, you start to see that show up as well. Small percentages, but you wouldn't expect much more. It's not as though, the vast majority of training is going to be virtual reality anytime soon. So, but I think that's the key is, are we able to support a wide enough variety of modalities, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like at the end of the day, this is about your learner. And you have to remember that everyone has a different learning style and a different approach to learning. And we need to ensure as educators that we're providing those various different types of modalities in order to ensure that our customers are actually learning in the way that they prefer, while also remembering that like doing all of this is really hard in terms of like content creation, right? So I think part of this, in order to be able to offer this amount and breadth of different training modalities, it's important to have really strong internal content creation processes and alignment with your L&D and enablement teams and all of the various teams that are crafting content within your organization, because therein lies the kind of like efficiency piece, right? Like by pulling some of these things together, you can start to create a lot of different modalities and a lot of different types of content to reach your learners at the right moment in time on the channels and in the ways that they want to be interacted with.
Yeah. Exactly. And Richard, you got a good question. I'm going to save it because it's more about kind of what we're going to get into as far as, considerations, tips and things like that. So I see your question and I think it'll fit very well there. But I wanted to spend a little time here. I'm going to spend a lot, but brought it up earlier. And I wanted, because Sam, you're here and you've got this experience, you did actually do this with not only with Shopify, but for them, which is very meta, that a company that
So meta. Always. My whole career is so meta.
company that does e-commerce, you were working on e-commerce for them. So that's interesting. Anyway, but yeah, we talked about how this is an opportunity for some organizations to generate revenue. And so just to give you a sense of how that might work, what that might look like, we'll look at some of the research that we've done and the data we've collected in this area. So first thing we asked, does your organization charge any of your external audiences for training? Nearly 60% of companies say, yes, we do charge at least some of our audiences for training. Okay, then how are you charging those audiences for training? And so you see about 15% say it's a subscription model. You buy in and you have access on an ongoing basis, for a set amount of time. Or we actually sell it a la carte course content. That's the most common, 47%. I'm going to buy this, then I'm going to buy that, and then I need that. Or you've got 17% that do bundles, and another one, 21%, it's actually included in the pricing. So it's an interesting structure, because it depends on how you do it internally inside the organization as far as who's responsible for what the accountability is. But the idea is that, hey, the training that we're providing is a valuable service. It costs money to create. We should bake that into the price of the thing that we're selling, and it's the value add as we deliver the product. So now the customer, of course, I expect to get some training, right? It's a given, but the price that I'm paying, it is baked in that I'm going to get that training. And so again, that's one of these things that internally you have to figure out, because in some cases, an organization might consider the training to be free because, well, they paid for the product and we just give them the training. But there can be a situation where there's a chargeback or some sort of recognition that L&D is responsible for some portion of that revenue and gets to recognize that. And so when we look at that, and I'm going to talk about some of the recognition of revenue, but mentioning e-commerce. Okay, as we do this, as we're starting to generate revenue, what kind of tool are we using? About a quarter of companies say the tool's already built into whatever we're using from a learning technology standpoint. It makes a lot of sense, especially if you're looking at an LMS that has extended enterprise as one of its main functionalities, like a Docebo, where they're very obviously committed to that extended enterprise. You're going to have those tools built in, but then there's also a ton of standalone e-commerce tools that are easier to integrate maybe with other things that the business is doing. So you might be using those, and so you got about 23% using that. But there's 51% that aren't using an e-commerce tool. So they're creating POs, or it's built into the sales channel, whatever it happens to be. Probably a little bit more difficult to manage, but you can see that that's where most things are happening. And then the little last piece of data, and then I want to get Sam share some of her experience here, but we did find that 24% of companies said we are able, with the revenue we generate through training by selling it in whatever model we're using, we're able to cover more than half of our LMS costs by doing that. That's for 24%. Only 17% of companies that do this, that sell, that charge, that generate revenue, say they aren't able to recoup any of their LMS costs. So there's a real opportunity here. Again, L&D often, looked down upon as just a giant cost center. Everything costs money. The ability to come back to the business and say, well, actually, we're defraying some of our costs, or we've generated some revenue here. So, but yeah, e-commerce is a big element that I think companies don't think about the opportunity there, right?
Sure. Yeah. And there's kind of like two elements, right, that you've brought up is that there's the strategy piece and the pricing piece in terms of like how you go to market with a monetized kind of education program. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of this relates back to that business maturity, right? Like at first, you're inevitably going to be a cost center, and that's okay. You're trying to figure out how your programs are impacting on your customers and those business outcomes. And at some point, you cross that line into, okay, I'm proving that, my programs are impacting the business in these ways, and I'm bringing revenue in these ways. I'm, decreasing support costs and improving cross-sell, upsell opportunities, and all of those other things that we're responsible for. for. And then there's kind of that last graduation to like, all right, now I'm a revenue generating machine, right? Like I'm part of the revenue generation of this organization. And it really requires a lot of thought in terms of what those programs actually look like. And then you need the technology piece to back all of this up, which great if an LMS like Docebo is really awesome with this. We have built-in e-commerce functionality that allows our customers to sell their training programs. But when you want to start thinking about that top level experience, and you're looking at a company like, HubSpot, for example, right? Like selling these incredible training programs, you're going to need something likely more robust that's going to layer on top of your LMS so that you can treat it like a business. You need to, have go-to-market strategies specifically for these products, these trainings that you're offering. And you need to have e-commerce best practices built in, and you need to know how to market those programs. There's a lot that goes into building monetized programs. And I usually see that coming as kind of like a final piece of the puzzle in terms of that maturity.
Yeah, and you have to match your approach with the complexity of your audience, because you have to think about things. If you think about technology, you have to think about, okay, is it all US dollars, or am I billing across the globe and I have different currencies? What are the tax implications from one place to the next? Are we doing credits? Are we doing chargebacks? Do I need to manage all those things? And so, understanding where your audience, anything they may experience, am I able to support that? Do I have the tools ready to do that?
And that goes back to the performance data, right? And why it's so critical to get that data early on, because with those proof points, it allows you to get the buy-in to continue deepening those programs and then go down the path of monetization.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into now just, okay, what goes into this customer training experience? What are the things that we should be thinking about beyond, the concepts that we sort of walked through already? But before we kick into here, let's just one more time get folks' thoughts on this. Where are you currently investing? Again, you have pick one, whatever your most favorite one is, or the most likely, or where you're spending the most time and money and energy. But when it comes to customer learning, where are you investing your time and money? Is it moving away from this sort of one-to-one to a one-to-many program? Being able to trying to scale these efforts. Are you trying to focus on the personalization and engagement aspect of learning? The customer community, maybe you're trying to build that out. So just interested to know where you're going. Maybe you're focused on the revenue piece, and maybe that's where all the energy is going. And of course, you can always share in the chat anything else that you'd like to share here. And actually, as people are voting, I think it's a good time. I'll bring up Richard's question, because we're going to get into what goes into the customer experience. And he had asked, do things like XAPI and automated recommendations, is that part of an effective customer training technology? And so my first crack is short answer, yes. Those things are important when you're building, these engaging internal learning programs. XAPI, that's just dependent on what kind of content, what kind of experience you're creating. If you're creating the kind of experiences where it's not as easily tracked by it's not a SCORM package that just says, it's start, stop, finished, grade, whatever. If you're trying to track, hey, this person did this thing, so if the experiences are getting a little more complex, yes, XAPI is going to be an important piece of that. If those are the kind of things that you want to track in your customer training. So making sure that your content generates XAPI statements and that your system can hold them and track them so you can look at them. So that's one side of that. And the personalization, 100%. Yeah, I think you can see it here on the list. Goes back to, trying to create these great experiences, even double your efforts for the customer because they're a customer. The more that you can create an experience that says, oh, these guys get me, they know what I need, they know who I am, they know what I'm doing, that builds that engagement. So the ability to recommend and says, hey, we see that you use our product this way, you might benefit from this program right here. That kind of stuff is a really key part to the customer experience. You think about what your customer experience is with almost anything that you do now that's at least remotely technology related, you're going to get that kind of experience, or at least expect that kind of experience. So consumers of learning are no different, right? They don't want a bunch of stuff that's meaningless to them or irrelevant, or I didn't buy that product. Why do I have this training here? I don't need that. am I getting the stuff that makes the most sense for what I want? So that's important. So let's show the results, and then we'll have Sam kind of walk us in through some of these thoughts, tips, and tricks. But hey, look at that. The thing I was just talking about, 46% is the biggest group here on the engaging and personalizing the learning content, right? So I think that's great to see that, because, you know, this idea of creating a strategy that drives revenue is great. But if you're thinking of it in terms of being engaging and personalized, you may be more likely to drive more revenue once you've got that strategy in place. So really focusing on a true customer experience. I think that's great to see that that's where folks are looking. All right. So yeah, let's talk a little bit then, Sam, about, you know, what makes a good customer experience. And obviously there's a lot of stuff, but I'll let you sort of take us through here.
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah. So, I mean, like, and some of this relates to that broader kind of customer experience that we've been talking about, right? So right now we're zooming out from just the like specific customer training program and really looking at this from a very holistic lens. So the first step, have a well thought out enablement, onboarding, or installation program, right? So no matter how you're delivering that thing, whether it's, you know, instructor-led or virtual instructor-led, a hybrid model, on-demand only, doesn't really matter. You need to just ensure that the experience aligns to the experience that your customers are receiving with your implementation or professional services team, and that your training materials align to the broader content experience that they're interacting with across all of those other touch points, like your knowledge base and your digital community, maybe the blog, the website, and all of those things. The second step in my mind is like optimizing in product guidance and having a really good user experience. I hear this so often with, you know, B2B SaaS companies. Well, our user experience is awesome, so we don't need in product guidance. Cool. You know, that might be true, but you have to remember that not every learner learns the same way, and everyone has a different style of approaching adopting a product. And so we need to make sure that we're offering the right level of support in the product, in the context of what it is that they're trying to do, and that we guide our users to achieving specific tasks in a certain order that we know are going to be conducive to reducing time to value, right? It comes back to that value piece. Yeah,
that's the you know, the subject matter expert dilemma always, right? You know, you know your products inside and out, and it's second nature. It's hard to get yourself out and understand maybe what somebody who's new to it might need. So it's definitely important to think about the UX.
Exactly. And then supplemented with that UX is that seamless customer experience across your academy, your digital community, your knowledge base, your website. All of these technologies create a cohesive experience for your learners. And it's about balancing that kind of push and pull approach, right? There are some things that we need to consider in creating this experience. You need federated search across these properties. You need an aligned content strategy. You need data to be funneling into your, you know, whatever it is, BI tool, some sort of centralized source, so that you have information as to how users are interacting with these different properties, and that inevitably helps to inform your content strategy. So that's a really critical element of that kind of overarching customer experience. Mm-hmm. Ongoing education and training, right? So beyond just the onboarding experience, beyond that pull or push and pull balance across all of the digital properties, you need to make sure that you're actually providing resources that are helping your customers learn the new products that you're releasing, adopt, right? We're focused on product adoption, on getting our customers to achieve maximum value out of the platform that you're providing, which helps with cross-sell and upsell, and ultimately increasing customer lifetime value, right? So all of those data elements are critical in achieving that, because you want to make sure that you're creating the right content and reaching the right audience with that right content on the right channels at the right moment in time. Mm-hmm. And that's about personalization. I've heard this talked about, right? This is top of mind for customer education practitioners across the board, personalization. personalization is really hard. We keep putting this word out there, like as if like, that's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. We want to do personalization, but the only way to do personalization well at scale is to ensure that you've crafted that seamless experience and that you have the right mechanisms in place to be able to capture the data to inform how you optimize that experience moving forward. So this is no easy feat. It takes a lot of time and effort and energy and buy-in from executive leadership and data and R&D to be able to create this experience.
Yeah, and it's something that's built over time. You can't expect it to be a complete personalization approach. Personalization, by definition, gets better over time as it builds on what you know. So definitely approach it that way.
And then, the social element gets layered onto all of this. So how are you providing those opportunities for your learners to interact with one another, to learn from the experience that they've had in building their programs? You need to layer on that digital community element. And maybe that's not just digital community. Maybe that looks like a meetups program or some in-person program that allows your people to come together to learn from one another. It's really critical that we offer that layered on experience on top of the digital experiences that they're receiving and interacting with your brand.
Yeah. So, jumping in then just, this is more of, a wrap up of some of the things we've already talked about and some of the elements that we've brought up, but, really thinking about the customer experience. So, as much as we try to focus on the modern learner, the modern consumer, same thing, try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody trying to have some sort of relatively frictionless experience. How do we build around that? What are the needs for the modern learner? You mentioned the social opportunities. Those kind of communities are great. The more you can have your customers learning from one another, the better. Again, that informed consumer who's going to go looking for answers, the more that you can have them part of your community, that much better. Building and measuring learner confidence. So, using the training to make sure that people are confident in what they're learning and that, okay, I do get it and I can use it, and then measure whether or not that's occurring. All right. So that's digging deeper than just those completions like we were talking about. Gamifications can be helpful. It's not something you don't need to worry about just layering on top of everything, but as you start to think about that experience, you think, again, go back to your own experiences. A lot of the things you do on a daily basis are gamified, whether it's points at a grocery store, at a gas station. I mean, that's a gamification of the way you interact with that brand. So the ability to provide your customers with some sort of incentives for the training, some sort of reward for the training, the learning that you're providing to help build that in. And it's not just the incentive either. It's also, it helps contribute to the whole entire customer narrative, right? Like you mentioned, Sam, everything should be aligned to this. You talk about that onboarding, you're bringing people in, everything should be all aligned and this experience should be continuous. Gamification is a way to help do that. You build into this narrative of, oh, you're following this journey, these things are happening in this order. It's just another element to help drive that. That micro learning, we say it all the time, people are busy. Again, these are customers, so we don't want to feel intrusive. We don't want to be forcing ourselves on them. We want to be able to meet them where they are, give them what they need when they need it. That doesn't mean that everything has to be a 6-second video, but the idea that can we chunk certain things up that we want to do? And that, again, that can help really align with marketing, with sales. You can time these sort of micro learning events with whatever your campaigns happen to be, refresh people's memory on certain products or upcoming products, whatever it happens to be. So there's a lot of synergy that can be done there. I think we beat the personalized thing pretty hard already. I think everyone gets it. And then, like I said, making sure we meet people where they are. It's so critical that we're not making this a chore. As much as possible, we're giving them what they need where they are. So, I'll give you if you want to just sort of wrap up any of these, and I'm going to look through the chat a little more to see what else we might have.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add here, or kind of like to wrap up and provide a key takeaway, if you will, for the audience. This all really hopefully has highlighted the importance of that cross-functional alignment piece. Find your internal champions, go and meet with the leaders of the various functions of your organization and get their buy-in on what that cohesive experience looks like for your customer across, every interaction, from that first touch point with marketing through sales, through the post-sale experience. It's really important that you get that buy-in on what that journey actually looks like for your customers. And then from there, you can work to achieve the right content, right place, right time, and evolve your programs and grow your programs. So that cross-functional piece is so critical to growing this customer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter actually makes a great point here with this question about, what about disability experience? So about accessibility, and it's a big issue. It has been, but it's really come to the forefront, especially when it's wrapped up into the whole sort of diversity, equity, inclusion concept that a lot of organizations are really focused on at the moment. So yes, Rich, I think, Peter, that's very important that you think about accessibility, and there's guidelines out there for learning content, the WCAG guidelines, and I think Docebo is one of the providers that does a really good job of making sure they're following a lot of these accessibility guidelines, but just so that people who maybe are colorblind or have some other visual impairment or maybe a hearing impairment, we're able to provide content in a way that they're able to experience it too. It's important, and what it does for you is when you have customers that have that need, the satisfaction that they get having that need met without having to ask for it is really hard to value, because it's so important. Having those kinds of things proactively addressed rather than waiting for a support ticket to come in that says, hey, by the way, I can't experience this content for XYZ. So when you're building content, I think not just for customers, but for anything, it's important to think about the accessibility aspect of it, but even more so with your customers, because there's a chance inside an organization, even a large one, 5,000, 10,000 people, you may have a good handle on what those needs are in that population. You probably don't externally. So being proactive about it is important. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on the accessibility piece?
I would just add, the only way to know your customers' needs is to ask them. And so make sure that you have mechanisms in place to gather that feedback from your customers, to have those continuous conversations with your customers, to make sure that you're meeting their needs, both in terms of content and modalities and methods of your training. We have to develop that empathy for our customers and our learners. And that's the only way that we're going to continue meeting their needs as we grow our programs.
Yep. So I think we managed to catch everybody's questions as we came through, as they came in. We wanted to make sure that you guys are all part of the conversation, which you very much were, and appreciate that very much. I just want to say a lot of thanks to Sam for joining us and providing your insights. I think it's important, especially for folks to know how much experience you do have with this. And so I would look to Sam as a resource if you have questions about, how to move forward with this kind of thing. And of course, thanks to Docebo for providing Sam to us today and the hour. So thank you all for your chat, your questions, and Sam, I'll give you the last word. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me, Dave. It was a real pleasure. And if anybody wants to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn.